Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, lads and ladettes. My name is Racket. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I greet you very firmly with my hand. But before we do any of that handshake business, follow me down below. Twitter and Twitch will be there. But, lads and ladettes, we are doing our own personalized ranking of the Oceanic scene coming into the Open Division, so you people have some context as to what could happen. Now, on this specific Open Division, there are tons of asterisks. Why is that? Because of the amount of roster shuffles. So I will get into that when we look at these individual teams. But of course, with that in mind, be very particular, or don't be too particular with my rankings, considering a lot of these players haven't had any professional game time with their given new team. So that's a key sort of point there that I wanted to add before getting into the rankings list. But, ladies and gentlemen, who is going to be rank 5? Well, rank 5 is Stunnermill. So, Stunnermill have actually had reasonable results. Of course, they did pull up an upset up against your name here in the ESL Open. And they have showed reasonable results, not up against the best teams, but they've been sort of fighting amongst, and they really have cleared themselves to be within that Division 1 sort of top 5 slot, right? Because we know our Oceanic scene has a specific problem with Division 1, and that it is not very deep. And I think Stunnermill are going to be the gatekeepers. They're going to be right on the edge of that top 5 slot. And they've showed in the past when they are really on fire, they can punish your name here, which I'm not going to reveal their spot on the list next, but once they are really getting into a rhythm, the carry style that Caramel Koala specifically, when he picks Widowmaker, can cause a lot of pressure, and I feel like the supports in their team are very, very strong. I'm very impressed with the way that Pandy plays, and they work around that very well, especially with the given synergy with the DPS players. So if they try to work that around, and if Stunner can try to sort out a lot of his personal inconsistencies, he can really pop off when he wants to, but at the same time it's a sort of double-edged sword. If they can try to sort that out, I can see them sort of floating in between maybe the 4th slot, but we'll have to see. So, who is number 4? Number 4 is your name here. So, maybe people are thinking this is a little bit low for your name here, but given the amount of roster changes, I think that's reasonably accurate. And your name here, of course, they've had a roster change, but not as they're entering this tournament. Previously, they of course replaced Smash Brother with Frogger, and they are struggling to really adapt that new sort of playstyle that Frogger brings to the team, and they're still trying to really find an identity, and they don't really have a sort of efficient practice schedule at the moment because certain players have had injuries or they've been on holidays or whatever, so they haven't really had a consistent scrim schedule to work off. So keeping that in mind, a lot of these players really do rely on getting warmed up, especially when you give them the sort of contextual part in what series they've been playing. They take a little bit longer to warm up, and I feel like if they are scrimming a lot more practice, if they're doing it more regularly, we can see a more consistent your name here when they can really innovate new strategies. Of course, I've seen Micro on May with the past. I think that's where they thrive the most, when they can throw a curveball at your team, because they have a massive amount of individual talent, right? You have Adam, who's arguably one of the best off-tanks within the region, and Signed and Micro proved to be a very, very stable DPS duo. But they really need to sort out their dives correctly, and they don't seem very passionate about particularly playing dive comps either. So if they can sort that out, Gob is a fantastic main tank in this main tank pool of a very shallow talent, then they can try to sort that out given what they do have. They have all the pieces that are necessary, it's just they need to clumber them all together. And how is that done? As I said, it's by playing the game more regularly and certain players having more passion. So, given that, now the 1, 2, and 3 are very, very debatable. I think 4 and 5 are less debatable, but this is more going off what players have been particularly telling me, and me evaluating how much these roster swaps are going to be taken into account. So, number 3 is actually going to be Dark-Sided. Now, People maybe would have argued that Darksiders should be 2, maybe they should even be 1, but let's see what they do have with their changes in the roster. So Nasty is being put to substitute, and CKM is coming into the roster. Now, a lot of people may see that as an upgrade. CKM has always been a very good plug-and-play sort of carry. So he's sort of like that TGK, where he's a Swiss Army knife. You can just slot him in, and he seems to very adapt well with his team. And if CKM really does find footing, obviously after having really inconsistent breaks, then I can imagine him being a very key factor for Darksided. But also in conjunction of that change with Nasty, of course, moving to substitute, CKM coming in, Graphics has moved to coach. And who has replaced him? It is Molotov. So that's a little bit of an interesting one, because someone who has personally worked with Molotov a lot of the time, of course, he'll be playing a different support. He's usually on aim support. So that means he'll be primarily playing Mercy and Lucio. And to me, Molotov has always been one of the stronger aim supports in the region. I think he really has solidified himself in that sort of slot. When going into Mercy, he had a very big struggle when trying to adapt his playstyle on playing with that particular hero. But he has improved over time. The question is, can he really mend in with the team? Because with support players, it's very difficult to plug and play with them, right, rather than a DPS, because you need to take into consideration player tendencies, who would most likely need the most pocketing, of course, given that Mercy will be played majority of the time, which person would be taking the most damage, given the results that we've had so far. Molotov really needs to think very intelligently when working around that, because support is a very difficult role to sort of slot in like that. And if he can, maybe Darksided can go above that third slot, but I feel like they may have a bit of growing pains at the start of the season as a result of that. And it will be all up to, let's see how much Graphics has with the coaching staff. Let's see how much hands-on work he has. We'll try and tinker Molotov to what they would want specifically in their team, try to adapt his playstyle. He's more stylistically an aggressive player. Of course, Mercy, you can't really be aggressive, can you? You're just sort of a bot healing people. And Lucio, he has had very minimal experience. I know he's personally been talking to me and Swoko on how to develop himself a little bit more. He's been looking at a lot of VODs, so I know that he's been working very hard to try and make sure that he is going to be doing well. But if that can really click in, I see Darksided transitioning these top 3 slots. But otherwise, I see them at the start of the season having a little bit of growing pains, and if they can work that out, I can see them ramping up towards the latter end of the season, just because purely of those particular slots. So Kings, they're at number 2. Now again, this may be a surprise to some of you, but given a lot of the player predictions, maybe it isn't. Maybe it isn't at all. So Kings Gaming Club, they've been through a rather tenuous trialing phase, trialing up a lot of different options for their Tracer player to replace Anime Fan, right? And now this isn't 100% confirmed yet. They haven't made an announcement. But if ATAR is the one to replace Anime Fan, I think stylistically, like on paper, that's pretty much the best bet they could ever get. Even though, you know, ATAR stylistically really doesn't play Tracer as much as his other DPS heroes, he's still very, very efficient, and his game sense transcends into other particular heroes, and he's played a lot of Soldier as well, so that in conjunction with game sense makes him a lot more better Tracer than what some people would think, given, you know, his lack of professional experience in that particular hero. So from what I know, in scrims he's been doing quite well, and if he can slot into that roster, I think that would be a perfect fit, specifically for this reason. So we know Termo is a very passive style DPS. He just sort of sits on the back line, plays a very defensive Soldier. They run him on Soldier for majority of these compositions. Just plays heal pad. Sometimes he gets a Mercy boost, and he really tries to pepper down your tanks very effectively. If they have a situation where they get 2 defensive DPS players, with the amount of space that Quats and the tanks give, if you have 2 very passive DPS players, I don't feel like they can really utilize that space. So Atar, of course, is a much more aggressive and confident DPS player, especially when he's on fire. So, given that, I think that that would really be a fantastic combo with Turmo, as you can really draw the line or draw a comparison between Atar and Anime Fan in terms of their aggressive playstyle and working very well with space. So if that can connect with each other, I view Kings as an extremely strong team. So if they can sort that out, Kings have always had a very strong and stable core. I think they probably have the best tank in the region to delegate space and quads. And if you give him a person who can really work with him very well, then their dives are going to look very, very good. The more aggressive the comps, Kings, I believe, will look very comfortable coming into the open. So if they can put the nail in the coffin with a lot of these synergies, then they would be looking perhaps maybe to take this number 1 spot. But from what I've been hearing, this number 1 slot, they've been very, very good. So who is it? It is Masterminds. So my mind has actually changed a little bit talking to a lot of the players. So my initial thought about Masterminds, and after looking a lot more closely at their play and what the players have specifically said to me about Masterminds, it really enticed me into making sure that I really get this nailed down with the hammer, right? So Masterminds, they're an interesting bunch. They won the previous ESL Open. So that is obviously an accolade to be proud of, considering Darkside, there was no real big team that was out, right? That forfeited or whatever. So all hands were on deck. I think one of the biggest question marks that I had personally was that Darkside had to play more games, so maybe they had a little bit of mental stamina coming into Masterminds, because Masterminds, of course, didn't have to play as much as Darksided, so coming into that series, they looked a little bit more fatigued, Darksided, I thought. But from what I've been hearing, they've been ramping up very rapidly, and this has really sort of made me very interested, because it's piqued my curiosity with all those Moira-type compositions, and I really do credit the coaching staff for this, because Masterminds, I feel, they have a very interesting playstyle, and they know how to correctly facilitate their playstyle very well, in that they like to run these Moira compositions, and they've used it in the year, so I'm not sure if they're going to be using it in the Open, this Open at least. But they used it in the Grand Finals up against Darksided, and they looked incredibly good with it because of that very, very aggressive dive-centric playstyle that Nellery and Mason had in conjunction. And they would just go backwards, make sure that Cantus or Dalsu that could play Moira, so Keynote, both of them can play Moira as well. Since Moira has a little bit more instant healing than what Zenyatta would have, they found it a little bit more valuable, and that's how they gathered Coalescence so quickly. So they did a very good job at making sure that their tanks couldn't get punished as harder because of the more burst healing coming out, and even on Numbani we saw them pick up the Ana as well. So with these burst healing compositions, it really makes sure that their tanks are being properly facilitated and a lot more confident coming into these fights, and they've really made it a lot more easier on them. So of course the roster change with Masterminds is that they have Kiki. Now he will be replacing Mason. Mason will be put on substitute. I'm not sure if he's going to leave the organization or whatever, which is absolutely huge. If you've listened to Kiki's comms, or if you've perhaps looked at a pug and seen Kiki there, and maybe someone in the scene was streaming and they had Kiki on their team, he is extremely good at comming, as in the intensity of his voice. He repeats target calls very, very well, and he's good at saying his specific cooldown and asking for someone to combo it. Now, the classic is once he has, the Orisa and he uses his Holt, he just screams, suck, 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 suck. It's actually quite hilarious. But he doesn't seem to really fade off. He's very consistent in terms of his comms, and of course, now this applies with Atar as well, which I forgot to mention with Kings. But he's more of a question mark in terms of if he's going to be on the actual roster. Of course, being a former Blank player, Kiki personally has the opportunity to add his flavor to the roster. Of course, Blank do have a lot of international experience, and with Kiki, of course, going to the World Cup, Obviously, scrimming a lot more Asian teams, Korean teams. They do have a sort of advantage in that regard that Kiki could perhaps sort of get the whisper in the air and say, all right, so this is what you do particularly over here. This is what we used to do in blank. And of course, ATAR can do the same, right? But that could be very, very big. And given how much of an intelligent player he is, I feel like they would utilize that. And in conjunction with their coaching staff, with Smeeves and Jamie, they could really attempt to facilitate great minds within their team. So masterminds are going to be looking very, very strong coming into this, I believe, given the information that I have received from players claiming that masterminds are looking extremely strong, arguably one of the strongest teams we've seen in a while within the Oceanic region. Now, scrims, don't forget, take with a grain of salt, because certain teams don't necessarily take it seriously. Certain teams will be experimenting with specific strats, so we can't exactly 100% go all in on that. But just from the sheer amount of people telling me that, it's very difficult to dissuade from that sort of opinion. And I think Masterminds, due to the specific swap in Kiki and their expansive coaching staff, they can really drive through in their CSL Open, and I think that they can really extend the lead with the Oceanic region and dethrone what Kings Gaming previously had. So that's pretty much it for this video. They're my top 5. Now, if we're looking for, one wildcard team just for the shits, right? My wildcard team will be Come On Bruh. So that is USMC's team. Now you also have the option of like Kangaroo Sports and stuff like that as well. So this would be the team that would probably make playoffs in Come On Bruh. So from what I know, their roster, they have USMC, Swilco, Davi, and the rest are all currently trialing. So see how that works out. I think Viz and Joyboy are in the mix, and they have more particular players that are free agents that are actually quite interested in joining that team as well, that are quite actually good at the game, which I personally can't reveal, unfortunately, but they do have a lot of options within that team, I feel, and I think USMC is arguably one of the best off-tanks in the region as well, and he's a very, very good captain and leader, and they also have Project as a coach within that team as well, and considering, the spotting within that team, having a coach is going to be incredibly important. And when you're giving new talent a chance as well, which of course Viz, Davey not really have the experience in top tier teams, having a coach is really going to boost their confidence, and it's going to make their job a lot easier. So of course there's no past results to really reflect on of that specific team, but I feel like they could be a wildcard team that could really take games off Stunnermill and perhaps maybe even your name here. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the ESL Open predictions. Now, if there are any feedback, feel free to type below in the description. So, just a brief recap. Masterminds, number 1. Number 2, Kings. Number 3, Darkside. 4, your name here. 5, Stunnermill. And my wildcard team is Come On Bruh. So, yeah, that's pretty much it for me, lads and ladettes. And if I do feel like I need to change it, or I need to adapt in a next video, then I will do that, and I will make it a lot more clear based on the given decisions that I would have previously. But as I said, there's not really too much to go by given the limited sample size that we have of a lot of these teams and their roster changes. So I just took a stab in the dark. Someone has to do it, mate. We need to make predictions, and we did it. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That's take care. Goodbye.